This is Mod City Live. We're going to just restart this whole thing. Volume is a bit low though. Okay, how about now? Probably a little bit better. Might be extra loud. Maybe I'm just needing to talk louder. So, keep giving me updates and we'll try to adjust as we go. I'm Joe.
I'm Sparks.
Victor is out of town, so he'll be back next week. And thanks for sitting here with us. Thanks for helping us out with the sound there, Daju. Uh, Hopefully that's the right pronunciation. A bit more. Okay, let's try this. Make sure you have your YouTube volume up. Yeah, okay, and we'll try for this. Let's see how we go. So today we're going to be looking at Max for Live, how we can incorporate this modular programming environment the into music, into art, into our standard workflow with our modular system, maybe with our Ableton Live system. I think Ableton is a very useful environment for getting into Max. It's it makes a number of things easier in the general development of basic tools and in really just getting signal in and out of Max. It makes it a little bit easy and snappy. If you've already got a signal coming into Ableton, then you can use Max. Let us know in the chat. Are you an Ableton user? Are you using Max? Any of these types of things. Are you a Reactor user? Are you a PD user? PD is sort of a live version or sorry, a free version of Max, an open source, maybe less visually striking, less developed open source version of something like Max. So we have some tools available to us, and Max is one of these things. It's once you start delving into it, you realize the depth that it can achieve. It can do almost anything that you can imagine with incoming and outgoing signals from your computer. So, and that could be music, could be audio signals, could be CV or gate signals, could be uh, MIDI signals, of course, could be video content, video signals of varying types, depending on what kind of tools you have for your computer. We can pull data from the web. Anywhere that we can pull a data stream, we can start to incorporate that into a Max program and translate that into data that we can apply into some other use, maybe to convert Twitter posts into MIDI data, as Tim Exile famously did a few years ago. Something a number of people have incorporated into a Twitter system, into a new Max patch that pulls data, pulls the Twitter servers, and pulls data into a Max application. Hey, KD, what's up? Good morning. Good afternoon. Uh, so let's get into it. So I think the easiest way to get into Max, if we're Ableton users, is to do it through Ableton. We can consider the possibilities with Max in standalone mode as well, but we'll kind of get into this user interface that is essentially the Max interface by going through Ableton. So maybe we kill two birds with one stone here. So let's switch over to the desktop. Hopefully you guys can still hear this. Hopefully you can see this. And yeah, okay, let's try this out. All right, so there's Ableton. And I'm going to do this on an audio track for now. We can start talking about uh, MIDI instruments, things like this. Um, in Ableton, in most of our DAWs, frankly, we have three different types of devices that we typically use: MIDI effects, they take MIDI input and filter that MIDI data, output some sort of altered version of that MIDI data. Audio effects, they take in an audio signal, they manipulate that audio signal, and out the other end comes an audio signal. Or instruments, soft synths. These are devices that respond to MIDI and use that MIDI information in some way, generating some sort of audio signal, and that's what comes out of the output. So we have these three uh, types of devices in Max for Live as well. And if we click on the Max for Live menu in the categories on the left side of Ableton, we'll see we have a number of subfolders. These mirror those three categories of devices. Let me just bring up the menu so I can actually see you guys. Okay, there we go. Okay. So that's one way to do it. I assume you mean Max for Live. We can also run it Max, of course, in standalone mode. It's going to look the same. So once we get in there, hopefully this will start to connect to the standalone. There's a little bit of a difference just in terms of the automatic routings here and there. But let's look in these menus. Anytime we look under Max Audio Effect, Max Instrument, Max MIDI Effect, we're going to see probably a number of presets depending on which packs you've installed, which Max for Live devices you've installed. If we look under any of these, though, we'll also see the first listing is this sort of vanilla beginner state, default state, Max Audio Effect. We'll see the same thing under Max Instrument. There it is. We'll see the same thing under Max MIDI Effect. These work in line as insert devices on a track in the exact same way that a MIDI effect, an instrument, or an audio effect would. So should be pretty straightforward in terms of that. For instance, I've got an audio track here, and if I open up the Max Audio Effects and I drop the Max Audio Effect default object device onto this track, then here we now see the Max Audio Effect device. And if I play my loop, hopefully you guys can hear that. It goes right through Max, the Max Audio Effect and back out. Now, we can start to see why that might be the case. It's telling us down here what is inside of this effect, what's happening to the audio that's coming in from live, what we need to do to make something interesting happen, and then how audio is coming back out of live. And we can get maybe a better view of that inside of the Max interface. And we can open the Max interface by clicking this button here. It looks like a little rectangle with two legs or antenna coming out of the top, two legs coming out of the bottom. This is the device that is special to Max. If we load any other device from Ableton, we'll notice they do not have that button. Here comes Echo. We have the hot swap button and the saving button, but we do not have that third Max for Live edit button. So we're going to click that button and it's going to light up. The computer is going to think for a moment, and in the background, Max 8 is opening up as a separate application, sort of embedded in Ableton, I guess. It's not really embedded in Ableton, but there will be some connectivity here. So it's still opening up. And here it comes. This is probably taking a little bit longer because we're streaming from this computer as well, so it's going to take a second, but it should come up. Something about not ready. Not responding. Okay, let's see. Let's try this again. back to Max for Live. We'll load another device. We need to go back and quit that version of Max 8 that's not responding. I think we'll do that. Let's try again. Okay. Yeah, maybe the streaming app is not jiving with Max. So, any current Max users in the chat room? Current Max users, Ableton users. One thing we'll mention while this is, there it goes. Okay, we'll come back to the thing that we're going to mention. Okay, so here is the Max audio effect that we were just looking at. When we open Max, we're going to generally see two windows. One of those windows is this Max console window, and this will report to us errors. We can print information to this window. We can basically do some math or do some sort of procedure in our Max patch on in this window over here. And over here, it will tell us if we're making mistakes or if we're trying to visualize some sort of data. This will be where all of that data is printed in a list, basically. And we can use the Max console window for visualizing other things. But the main kind of programming side of things will be done in this Max window over here, which is probably going to look a little bit daunting when we open it up. Okay, so here is basically the exact same thing that we were seeing in Ableton, and we can close this up. Now, here's this is looking probably a little bit tiny. So we can use this zoom function up in the upper corner. We can zoom in, we can scan and scroll back to where we were. That's much easier to look at. Okay, so now we can see what we're dealing with. Pretty much the mirror image of what's back here in this Max audio effect that we just dragged in. And we see a few pieces of information here. It's telling us that audio from live is coming in through this device plug-in tilde. Okay, anytime we see that little sine wave looking thing, that's going to indicate that we're dealing with audio signals. It's telling us that this is the left-hand channel, this is the right-hand channel, and if we hover over these outputs, they tell us a little bit of information in this little pop-up window. It tells us this is the plug-in input channel 1, okay, plug-in input channel 2 over here. So this is the left channel, the right channel of the audio coming in through Ableton. The audio travels down these cables and into this plug out device, and it tells us this is sending audio back to live. We can see left and right channels, and it's telling us this in between here, disconnecting these cables, this is where we will build our audio effect. Okay, these are just comment windows. They're giving us a little bit of information. Now, this came in unlocked. This is closer to what we're going to see when we close up our project, and you can see it looks a little bit closer back here. We don't see anything, any lines or dots in the background, but we also, in this mode, cannot move anything around. We can't edit our patch. So this unlock button in the bottom left-hand corner is going to be pretty important. This allows us to actually click and operate any interface that we build up here, knobs, sliders, things like this. And when we're in unlock mode, when we grab something, it's a little bit harder to turn knobs, click sliders, things like that. When we grab them and try to click them, it will be actually grabbing them to move them and maybe patch or edit our patch, basically. So when we're ready to finish, we're going to lock our patch, that will allow us to try things out, turn knobs, move buttons, maybe not move buttons, push buttons, things like this. So there's another level to that. We'll talk about presentation mode in just a minute, but uh, you can see here there's also this menu. This might not show up so much in the standard Max application because it's not as closely tied to Ableton use. This is telling us that anything below this line is going to be out of the range of the user interface inside of Ableton. So whatever we build in Max for Live, or in Max for that matter, that we want to use in Live, it's going to have to fit above this line in this area up here because Ableton is incapable of displaying anything below that pixel distance, I suppose, that range of distance. So this is just kind of giving us a heads up. There's a line here. Anything that we want to be able to use as a user interface has to happen above that line. We can create a patch below that line, like all of the guts of our composition here can be underneath that line, and we can just have knobs and controls up above that thing. But another important kind of thing to be aware of here. Now, Max is a vast application and can do many, many, many things. So there are pre-existing packages and tool sets inside of Max, but the real nitty-gritty of Max happens with these boxes. These are called objects, and we can create new objects by hitting the N key and typing into this box. Now, just learning all of the objects is its own challenge because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of objects, and they all do small tend to typically do small things. And when we piece those pieces together, they do more interesting and complicated things, right? So if we want to build something, if we want to select an object, we might be able to type in uh, letters, numbers, values, not numbers so much, but letters, that will start to auto populate our new object. So I could type in MIDI, for instance, and not only does it start to autofill with one of the many MIDI objects that are inside of Max, we also get a drop menu with every other object that has anything to do with MIDI and conveniently a little bit of a description of what that object does. So, and as we scroll on past all of those objects, notice they're all listed with a little O icon next to them, right? As we scroll on down past this, we get to patches, which might be example patches for using MIDI devices, using MIDI information, right? So, okay, getting political messages over here. So, let's get rid of that device. Another place we can find objects is over here in this left-hand menu of boxes of devices. Maybe we can. Oh, now I've done it. There we go. I thought I was going to be able to expand that maybe, but I guess not. Okay, but we can click on any of these devices, and you see now a pop-out window appears, and there are a few different very useful items in this menu. Okay, one of them is the package manager, and this brings up a window which connects to the internet. And here we can browse through and find and download packages, which are other objects, maybe external objects that users have created, patches, uh, uh, pieces of patches. A couple weeks ago, we had Tom Hall on the show, and he was talking about creating machine learning based devices in Max. And he mentioned the ml.star collection, which is a package that we can download. We can just search up here for ml.star, and boom, there it is. There's the whole package. It's got, now I've already installed it, so we can just launch it, we can install it, we can uninstall it, we can view the website that describes its use, and we get all kinds of information that we might need about it. And then when we're ready to use it, we can just hit that launch button. Excuse me. Okay. And maybe when we're done here, I'll show you one of the machine learning devices that I built because Tom got me really curious about that. We can also find tutorials in the Max packages or the the package manager. This is where we can find tons and tons of tools to help us learn. Excuse me, to help us learn about Max. And one of the ways that we learn about Macs is by looking at other devices that people have built. And we're not talking about necessarily going in and opening up the, like the Convolution Reverb Pro or something. Even the LFO tool or the LFO based MIDI or mappable effect in Max for Live is extremely complicated in its functionality. So not maybe the place to start learning how to build things. We want to maybe start very simple and build from there. And these built-in tutorials, I think, are going to be very useful in getting to starting to grasp an understanding of how these tools work. So the package manager, very useful to find a ton of stuff to teach you a lot more about Max. We have the file browser that kind of takes us into all of the stuff that's inside of the Max bundle. There you can see there's the ML Star collection, and there's a bunch of patches that come with it, a bunch of objects, examples, help documents. This is a really well-designed package. I imagine that they're not all this super refined, but it's all about the people who build that tool, I suppose. So the file browser allows you to look through all the tools that you've downloaded and installed through that might just come with Max or that might be downloaded through the package manager. Bunch of other stuff in here like an audio menu, a video. These are libraries of your own audio, video, and images. Snippets are like small little chunks of objects put together. So if we had like a little, let's say, a filter that we like to use at the end of a plug-in chain or the end of an audio signal chain, we could save that in the snippets and just drag it in every time, and boom, a number of objects would be up there all mapped together and put together for us. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we come into Max. Plugins, we'll come down to these in a minute. But up here, there's this device that looks, or this option that looks like one of the objects. And if we click that, we get all of our objects, literally every object inside of Max, of which there are many. And so we might need to subdivide those objects into collections of devices that we're looking for. And that brings us to kind of some of the bigger sections inside of Max, the collections of tools that might exist inside of Max. So, for instance, we see one option here that says Max. That's going to be especially math, general functions inside of the Max application, like background color for your patches, basic mathematics, devices for user interface control, like dials, dialog boxes, every basic and not so basic function that we need to use inside of Max might show up in this menu. Things, however, that might not have to do with anything specifically related to signal processing, because there's another menu, the MSP collection of devices. These are specifically for signal processing, audio signal processing. These are the devices that we're most likely going to use for the signal processing between our plug-in and our plug-out device. But we might need to use some of the Max devices to control how that signal is processed, how the different devices that might perform signal processing handle information, right? We might need to turn up the filter cutoff value of on a filter, frequency cutoff value, and so we might need to use Max devices to creatively control that thing. We'll look into that shortly, but Max is going to be kind of the number based handling. MSP, or kind of math based handling. We'll use majority Max devices for MIDI manipulation, for instance. MSP is going to be audio processing for processing signal, CV, audio, things like this. Um, and you can see all of these devices have a little tilde object or letter insignia next to them, just like our plug in and plug out. There's also jitter, which is going to handle uh, larger chunks of data, video content, uh, matrices of values as opposed to maybe lists of values, which the Max collection is better for. Um, and there's a couple of additional functions in here. There's the ML star node jit.mo. I'm not even sure what this does. It looks like it does masking. Okay, so this is like visual uh, control functions up here. Anything that says jitter is probably going to have something to do with video, 3D mapping, 3D manipulation, things like that. There's a Max for Live menu. This has controls, functions, tools that will be not only used for Max for Live devices, but particularly useful for those types of things. For instance, here's a live gain control. This is basically just a volume controller, and look at that. It looks kind of like Ableton. So when we put it in our patch, we kind of keep a little bit of visual uniformity. Um, this might look really dumb right now, but we're going to move things around. We're going to hide things. We're going to, basically maybe create a volume slider to begin and, go from there. But there's one that actually looks like an Ableton tool. So that's what the Max for Live devices are for, as well as communicating with Live in maybe deeper, more complex ways. That is one of the benefits of this interaction between Ableton and Max, this marriage of cycling 74 and Ableton into this more complicated form. There's also Mira. This is going to allow us to use iOS devices and build interfaces so we can use wireless devices and control our interface from that wireless device. So, a lot of complicated stuff. Let's talk about what we really need to make something happen in this patch. Okay, we've got our plug-in device, our plug-out device. We've got cables connecting the inputs to the outputs. And we've got a lot of kind of labels around here. Now, what do we really need? We don't need all these comments. We kind of know now, hopefully, what is happening in this very basic arrangement. Now, if we want to check, if we want to let's save this. We'll save this as, what are we going to save this as? How about Max Audio, test. All right, good enough. We can close this, and back over here, it should snap back to our original, or basically what we just saved. Now, if we open that back up, maybe we disconnect the signal. Let's start by trying this loop that's loaded up here out. Okay, signal's passing through, right? Okay, what if we disconnect these cables? There we go. What if we turn these off, right? Just save that. And now if we close this window, notice down here the cables are gone. If we play this signal, nothing gets through, right? So we make changes, we save, and then we can start to see some actual effect. Now, let's come back over here and let's really simplify this. Let's get all of these comments out of the way, even this one. Okay, now we're down to just plug in, plug out. Now, let's put something in between these things, something we can use to control the signal, like that live slider. There's another place to grab that slider. If you notice along the very top up here, we have access to objects. Okay, this can just create a new object. That's just like hitting the N key. Conveniently, if we hover over these options, it also tells us the key to press, M. That's how we create a message. This allows us to type a message in here like a number value, and then we can click on this number value and send it to some object if it needs a number, if it needs a message. We have comments. This is like that, the comments that we just saw telling us what to do with the plug-in and the plug-out devices. We have switches, right? Could lock this. Can switch things on and off. So we have a whole bunch of different devices up here. We'll come back to a number of these, but one of them is Max for Live Objects. And there's a live button, there's a live dial, grid of buttons, blah, blah, blah. Here's our live gain slider. And we could put it over here. So what about this live gain slider? What does this do? Well, if we want to know more about this live gain slider, we might know, oh, okay, it's looks like a live slider, but it looks like a volume slider kind of, right? Decibels are measured here, just like our mixer sliders. But we might need to know more about it than just it looks nice, right? So a couple of ways that we can start to learn about this. One is we can hover over the inlets and the outlets, and this will tell us a little bit of pop-up information. It tells us live gain. It's looking, you can see here it says live gain tilde, and then in parentheses, live gain tilde, colon, and then it tells us in parentheses the type of input signal that it's expecting. It's telling us this wants a signal. This is an audio signal or a CV signal if that happens to be the case. But we're going to deal with audio for today. And then it tells us audio signal to be scaled, channel 1. And then it expects an integer or a float value to control. It can also take an integer or float value. That's a integer being a number, a whole number, a float value being a decimal point number or a number with a decimal point value. It will take either of those, and it will take those things in a parameter value range between -70 and +6. Okay, and that indicates the range of the live gain. So not only can we send in a signal there, we can also send in a number value or a knob control and set the live gain slider in there. That's kind of complicated for one input device, right? It can take a signal or it can take a number. And then on the right-hand side, we have maybe the more simplified version of that, just a signal, and that's for channel 2, audio signal to be scaled. That's the right-hand channel, left hand, right hand. But that left-hand input can also take a number value, which can change our slider for us. And then we have a bunch of outputs. And if we hover over these, this will tell us a bit of information about each of these. Signal 1 output, the scaled signal from channel 1. Signal 2, scaled signal of channel 2. And then we've got, this tells us the parameter value of the slider, right? It's telling us that out of this is going to come an integer or a float number value, and it's going to tell us a number probably between -70 and +6. Parameter value, this is probably, a 0 to 1, depending on where the slider is set, in case we need some sort of number value like that. Probably don't need to use this, and then amplitude of every channel in dB as a float list. So if we need if we need information about this knob and its settings, then we can get that information and visualize it somehow. We might never need most of those things, but for our basic use, we definitely don't. But hey, whatever. Maybe we can find a use for that. But another way to get a lot of information about any object is to, I think it's command click on it on Mac. In PC, it is option click. And when we do that, you guys will have to try that out and tell me, is it PC or is it command click or option click on Mac? Um, and look at this. Now we have a whole help document about this device. Okay, and it's telling us quite a bit of information. It's telling us this is the live.gain tilde object. It's a decibel volume slider and monitor. Live gain tilde is a slider that scales input signals, audio signals, and provides a visual indication of the current sound level on the decibel scale, just like our Ableton volume sliders, right? And so then it gives us an example of this patch, or sorry, of the use of this slider. There's the slider right there. And here we have some tools that are going to send a signal. You can see this thing is cycle tilde, and then it's got a number. What's a cycle, right? This is a cycling wave at 440 hertz. It's going into a little mixer. There's like a whole patch here. We might not know what most of these objects do yet, but guess what? We could unlock this patch and we could say, biquad tilde. What does that do? Option, click on that. And boom, we get a whole other help window to teach us about this. Oh, it's a 2-pole 2-0 filter. Implements a 2-pole 2-0 filter using the following equation. Maybe too much information. You can specify the coefficients. It's basically a complicated filter, right? It might do things the way that normal filters do. If we set it up right, it's showing us kind of here that it looks kind of like a normal filter. It's in low pass mode, has cutoff, resonance, gain, these types of things, right? So this is how we learn a great deal about how these devices and Macs work. We can look in here on the right side, we get this reference guide, and this shows us values that. Oh, now we're in the biquad reference. Let's go back to there we go, the live gain reference. So this is telling us over here by default when we open this help document about the device that we're actually looking at. And it's saying these are all the messages, the types of messages that live gain will take. These are attributes that we can set to the live dial to make it perform in certain ways, right? Oh, look, one of them is metering. And look over here. There's a menu and then a message, and we can send a value into that message, and it's going to tell this thing how to act in terms of the metering settings. This is starting to get into some complicated use of Macs, but that's kind of how things start to get with Macs. They start to get complicated quick. Now, we might not need to send messages. We might be able to just tell this object, hey, act in this certain way, behave in a certain way. But these messages allow us to, or these attributes, as we should really call them, allow us to set complex combinations of controls in one simple object sometimes. And maybe live gain has a lot of those things. It also tells us here are some similar objects that might be of value to us. Another gain control object, another meter object, right? These kind of maybe separate the functions that we see all in one live gain control here. And then at the top of this window, we have additional attributes, right? Additional ways to manipulate this thing, right? Oh, we can make it go horizontal. We can make it drop the number and the name. We can change the range within which it's actually acting. Instead of -70 to +6, we could set it to -24 to +12. So this is a malleable tool. We can change even the color attributes. Some of these things, there might be other ways to control the gain slider other than, you know, coming into something like this where we have to pick, send menus in there and all this stuff. There's other ways to perhaps do that. And down here, there's even multi-channel functionality for this slider. Getting very complicated, okay? But let's try to get some signal through this thing. We're gonna take the plug-in, right? Remember, oh, that's weird. It changed font. Oh, that did it too. Okay. All right, Max. Okay, so we have the plug-in, and we have the plug-in input channel 1 and input channel 2. And we could send that left channel into our gain slider. We'll send the right channel into the channel 2 on our gain slider. And then down here, remember we had channel 1. Send that to the left. Channel 2 to the right. Now we could swap these. We could create, you know, create phase problems or something by maybe playing around with these left and right channels. We could just go mono by maybe just deselecting or deleting that cable and taking a second cable out from the left, right? We could just take the left channel in and go mono into both of these, right? Let's save this. Let's close this. And hey, look at that. We built a device. So now we've got a device, and this should probably already show up in our menu over here. Maybe not. I guess I have to drag it in there. Maybe I saved it to a weird spot, but or maybe I'm just missing it in the menu. It seems like it should be right there. Yeah, no, I don't see it. Anyway, we can just hit the save button here, and then oh, that's where it is. It's in my presets. Yeah, that's where it should be, I guess. Anyway. All right, well, now we've got a device. It works. We've got audio coming through it. That's not very exciting. And it also kind of looks terrible, right? Like, what's going on down here? It's not very attractive. So maybe we want more to happen in this thing as well. Maybe we want a little bit more complexity to our device. Let's zoom back in. Oh, look, okay, there's a trick. If we zoom out, if we select a device and then we hit zoom, it zooms in on that device. Okay, that's a handy feature. Max has gotten a lot smarter in the last many years, in the last few versions, and having all of these menus around the side really makes it look more complicated, but these add quick functionality to get into some of the functions inside of Max. One of those maybe important tools is the presentation control right here. This is kind of like the freeze or the lock function, not freeze, the lock function over here. However, presentation mode makes choosing which objects we actually want to see in our Max device easy. For instance, if we put this into presentation mode, notice that everything disappears. We can think of presentation mode as the final panel view of our device. So what we'll do is we'll select the material that we want to show up on that panel, right? We don't need these ugly plug-in, plug-out boxes or the cables, right? Those don't need to show up in this interface down here. We just need this slider right now. So if we right-click on that slider and we come down to Add to Presentation, Control-Shift-P, then when we save this, we go into presentation mode. There it is. Okay. Sick. Let's save this and close it. But hey, what? It's not doing it back here. So there's one other thing we need to do. Let's open this back up. Let's zoom in. Oh, that's so much better than having to scroll around. Okay. Now, um, if we deselect all of our objects or any object, just click in the background of a patch. We have this function over here, the inspector. We're going to be in the inspector a lot when we're building our patches, when we're fine tuning devices and tools. When we click on the inspector with a device selected, it shows us a great deal of information about that device. We're going to come right back to this in a moment. But before we do, let's focus on presentation mode for 1 second. Let's click on the background and notice the inspector goes blank. But up in the top, there's this button here, Show Patcher Inspector. And we want to select that. That shows us kind of the whole patch settings. Okay. This might show us just the basic settings at first. We might want to go over to all. And here we get controls over, oh, background color. Cool. Let's just choose load background color, something a little more red. And down here, we're going to scroll down to, oh, I think that was the right function. Object background color. Unlocked patch background color. Let's change that too. Let's go to yellow or something. There we go. Oh, puke. There we go. Okay. So I don't know about that color, but whatever. It's more about the fact that we can do it. All right. So let's scroll on down. And if we look, there's a lot of different functions in here. And we're going to look to view. And the third option down in view is open in presentation. And that's going to open this in presentation mode every time we save and close it and look at this and anytime we load it, frankly, in Ableton. So let's save. And look at that. There's our volume slider. None of that ugly, the ugly guts of our project. It's just this slider, and we can play it. Of course, now it's coming through just the left channel sent in mono. I mean, the loop might be mono to begin with. Oh, okay, it's not, but actually, technically, it looks like it is. It's the same signal on the left and right. So, but we mixed it down to mono anyway. Now, if we delete this and reload it, look at that. It loads up in this nice presentation view. We can bring it back in here. We can go out of presentation mode so we can see our patch. And now would be a great time to change this back from this sick green color. Okay, but the point here is that we've set the patcher to disregard everything in our patch except for the few devices that we actually selected to look at, the ones that we select to add to presentation mode. Okay, so this is a useful way to quickly start getting our interface looking a little bit more usable, a little bit less, cluttered and chaotic. So, and if you look at the more professionally made Max for Live devices, they all open up in this kind of this presentation mode. If we load up something like the, oops, where am I going? There we go. If I load up the LFO device or something, it comes, looking refined. It looks like a plugin. It doesn't look like some weird boxes with wires all over the damn place, right? And if we open this up, it opens in this device mode, in this patch mode, also in presentation mode. And we can open it up and look at that. It's even going to teach us about how it works, right? So, there's a lot of value in opening some of these existing Max for Live devices and trying to learn a bit. Now, that LFO tool is kind of complicated for your first device, but there is a great deal of information in many of these tools that gives us some detail. Now, if you need Max for Live devices, we can come back over here into the packs section under places in the Ableton browser. And under available packs, you might see things that say Max for Live, M4L, um, Max for Live Essentials is a pretty good one, pretty big one. There's some other ones, Creative Extensions, CV Tools. Maybe we'll do some CV tools in the near future, talk about how to integrate Ableton and the modular synth using these Max for Live devices. And then there's a bunch more free Max for Live devices on the Ableton website under packs. If you go to the ableton.com website and search under the packs menu, there's a bunch that are for sale as well, I'm sure, but there's a number of them that are free. One of my favorites is the Max 7 pitch and time machines, which has an auto tune plugin, a lot of cool harmonizing vocal type of tools. Um, Creative Extensions is really cool too. I use that all the time. There's one audio effect in here called the color limiter, which is kind of like the Ableton version of the sausage fattener. So it's really nice. Adds a lot of grit and color, especially it's really cool on drums. But so you can access a ton of tools for Max for Live for free through that pack section. And then there's also maxforlive.com, which is an online repository for user created Max tools. So you can go there, search for, delay or LFO or sequencer or whatever it is that you're looking for, and find, a ton of user created tools that may or may not fit what you're looking for. So you can sift through those things and find the right tools for what you're doing. Find tools that you can take apart and build your own tools with the innards of those tools. Learn from other people's devices and how they built them. This is all worthwhile investigation to learn more about Max for Live. So um, let's continue. Any questions in the chat room, by the way? Hey, Jolie, thanks for joining us. Hey, Jubrel. Did I say that right? Jubrel. Um, yeah. Tell us also if you have any favorite Max for Live devices. Um, okay. Let's look at how we can maybe make this a little bit more interesting. Well, actually, before we do that, let's look at the inspector for the live gain device. This is something that we've now made a device that operates in Ableton, and that means that if we come back over here into our clip, if we look at clip envelopes, our device should show up here. Oh, there's Max Audio Test, which has a device on option. There's a live.gain tilde. There it is. That doesn't tell us much information. Oh, we have a cat in the studio. Live.gain tilde. That's our live gain slider, but I don't know about that name, right? That's kind of weird. If we look at the automation on this side, our device is going to show up there. Max Audio Test. Device on and live.gain tilde, right? Since there's one slider in there right now, that is, we kind of know what it's referring to, but maybe we want to name that something else, right? Maybe we want to give that a more sensible handle, because live.gain tilde doesn't really mean much to anybody. So now we could come over here. We could play around with the size and shape of this thing. But if we really want to make some visual changes to this device, we have to go to the inspector. All right. So with this device selected, we open up that inspector on the side. Okay. And oops, I didn't mean to create a new number box. Okay, live gain. There we go. So again, we'll select all instead of basic. And this gives us all of our editing controls. Okay. For instance, we have um, clip size, meaning the amount of gain above that 0 point. This will take it up to 12, plus 12. Um, Actually, maybe this is just showing us the little clip area up there in a little bit more extended view. It's not changing the range yet. Here is where we change the range. We could make this -70 to plus 12 now, or -24 to plus 12. We saw in the help document that it showed all of those different ways to manipulate the live gain device. And look, here's where we do a lot of that stuff, right? We can change the range of our device. We could just make it go right up to 0, and that's it. Um, Maybe not 0. I guess it wants to go to +3 at the very least, because that gain will go above that 0 slider. So, here we've bumped into a limitation of the live gain device. We can turn on and off the display name. Look at that. Another option that we saw earlier. We can turn off the display value, the little number value at the bottom, right? We can tell it to hide on lock. We don't want it to do that anyway because we want it to be included in the presentation, which we've got checked here. We can do that just by saying add to presentation by right-clicking on the device as well. But you can see there's a lot of ways to set this thing up. We could send it messages, as we saw in the help document, or we can set those values here, or we can right-click some of them and set them there. Live mode. Look what happens when we go into live mode. We get a volume level display on the side over here. However, look, it's a little off. It says 6 up there at the top still. So, look, display range grayed out. The clip size option grayed out. So as soon as we go into live mode, a couple of these options disappear. Okay, we have orientation. Oh, there's our vertical slider, or a horizontal slider, rather. We can change the range size, the presentation size, and how often it refreshes. Probably don't need to mess with those too much, especially since we can just kind of grab it and resize it here. Okay. And maybe let's go out of live mode now too. Just reset the value up here to 6. Okay. And then we can also set all of the color qualities. Instead of overload going to red, we can make it go to blue. Instead of being generally green, we can have it be purple, or, whatever we want this thing to be. Okay, interesting. Let's do it. And as we scroll down, we see other things like um, hints. I suppose this will, as it says here, it sets the text that will display in a pop-up hint when the user moves the mouse over the object in a locked patcher. I think that's like the little hints window that pops up down here, like in this thing, right? So we could set that up. This is how in detail we can get inside of Max, right? We can tell it this device will kick your ass. Okay. And, info view text. Maybe that's what shows up in that little window. Let's find out. Let's save this patch. And we can come down. We can open up our info window. Let's close this. Aha. Okay. Oh, there we go. There's the difference. You see when I hover over this slider, it's telling us down there that there's a little yellow pop-up window. That's not like very normal Ableton display, if I'm not mistaken. This device will kick your ass. And then over there in the info window, it's telling us info view text. That's the one I wrote in the info view. So, okay, we're learning here. Let's zoom back in. Let's open our inspector back up. And then maybe we can come back down here. We'll get rid of this hint view because that's kind of weird. And then here we'll write This device will kick your ass. Or whatever you want to write there. Love note to your girlfriend. Whatever you want to put in that menu. A love note to your fans. How about that? You know, one use uh, of this knowledge might be building a device that you use on your record, and then you could give that device away to your fans. You know, this is added value with my record. I use this filter that I built on this one track, and here now you can have it, and then you can write a little message to your true fans there. Info view title. We could type in what do we want this to say? Um, get it on. How about that? Oh, okay. I was just going to say one thing now, apparently. Let's save. We'll see what that says in a minute. We can change the font of the text. Probably don't want to change that so much with Ableton. You can see it automatically sets it to the Ableton font size. Oh, that's maybe a little big. Let's go back. Okay. And font size bold. You know, if you want to be a hard ass, you can set it to bold italic. Now that'll teach them. Scripting name. Now, some of these things, especially down here, once we get to parameter, this is where especially the name is going to matter. So here we have the long name and the short name. Setting these are going to determine what we see in the drop-down menus when we perform automation and clip envelopes. So we might want to change these, especially as we start getting more and more controls in here. This is going to get complicated. We're going to see menus that just have a long list of things that say live gain and a -1 or -2 or whatever, depending on how many we add into an interface. Same thing goes for knobs and dials and things like this. So changing this value is going to be important. We'll call this volume. We'll call this where do I see this? Okay. Let's save. Let's close. And so now let's see what we see here. Aha. Look, my slider has now been renamed. Where do I see this? Right? And now it seems like my info text isn't showing up either. Interesting. Weird tweaks. Okay. Well, we see where do I see this is now the name of the knob. Look up here. Max audio test. Volume. There it is. Why does it say where do I see this? Oh, weird little quirk there, right? We see in the menu the knob is called volume, that long name. In the slider menu, when I let go of it, it goes by the name listed here. This is some of the funkiness that sometimes happens. Yeah, interesting. Let's switch back. So maybe good practice to name those things the same. Otherwise, it could get a little bit confusing. So we'll come back in, select this, zoom in, go back into our settings. There we go. Volume. Good reason to keep some uniformity there. Okay. Our number value here is listed as loudness. We could have number values listed as frequency. It wouldn't make much sense to have any of these other options for this particular use. But if we were setting the display information on a knob, slider, things like this, maybe we'll do that in a few minutes. And we can set an initial value. We can say, actually, I want this thing to always start at 0 dB. And I can maybe put a decimal there. Okay, the rest of this stuff starts to get into some pretty complicated application. Let's save this. Let's see if it's actually showing up the way that we want it to with the colors we expect. Yes, save. Keep the volume down on our track. We'll just overdrive it here so we can see if we get actually some of the color that we want. Yeah, so we're going from like lighter purple into like a darker blue up here. That was accidental, but it looks kind of cool. Would probably look cooler with a different background color. But this is where we're starting to get into the fine tuning, right? We can always come back into the patcher inspector and change that background color. Maybe put it back to something Ableton friendly. That might be a little bit better. Okay, so let's go back out of presentation mode and let's think, what else could we add to this? Filter? That might be interesting. That might lead us on a good little path here. Okay, so let's find a filter. A couple of ways we can do that. We'll close our inspector. We could go to the objects window over here on the left side again, and especially under MSP, max signal processing. This is where we'll find all of our audio processing, if you recall. And here we might look for filter, right? Now, we could scroll down here looking for things that say filter. Oh, there's a couple of things, right? I don't know if those look like filters. We could also click this little up-down arrow menu, and this gives us a subdivision of the MSP devices. So here's filter. And oh, there's that bi-quad that we saw earlier. Now, notice if we hover over any of these, then down there at the bottom of this menu, it tells us this is the all-pass tilde object. It applies an all-pass filter effect. And we see there's a number of these different devices, all of which somehow fit into the filter family of MSP devices. Here's a comb filter. Apply a comb filter effect, right? Scroll on down. Oh, here's low res. That's a resonant low pass filter. That might be useful. Here's a bunch of additional filters, MC filters. These are multi-channel versions of the stuff we saw up here. And if we scroll on down to the bottom, we'll just check and see other ones that we see here. One pole, phase shift, plot. Oh, SVF, state variable filter with simultaneous outputs. Let's try that. We can just double click on it. It creates that object over here. We could also click and drag it to the desktop like that, or to the workspace. So here we have a SVF, a state variable filter. Okay, let's scroll over a little bit. Let's learn a little bit about the state variable filter. There's our signal input. And we have inputs for cutoff frequency in hertz and resonance. Go figure. Our filter has a cutoff frequency and resonance control inputs. Great. And it has a signal input because the filter wouldn't be filtering much if we didn't have something to send into it. Okay, so we have inputs. A signal input, frequency cutoff, resonance. And then we have 4 outputs. A low pass output. These are the simultaneous outputs it mentioned. High pass output, band pass, notch output, right? Just our basic types of filters, our 4 most common filters, and they're all built in this object. So we send a signal in, we control that filtering, and we pick an output. We could even use some sort of menu to choose between which output we want. We could have each of them coming out and choose which one we want. But let's, just for posterity, let's option click on this thing and look at a working example of this thing. Now, we could start this up and it will generate a signal. This is going to pass noise into a state variable filter. Each one of those outputs are sent to one of these things. These are kind of like live dials in a sense. These are kind of like VCAs, volume controls, amps, really. And then these on-off buttons, these toggle buttons, will enable that particular channel to send an output. And we can read about this. It says state variable filter. It's an implementation of a state variable filter based on Hal Chamberlain's book, Musical Applications of Microprocessors. Might be useful to get that book. A unique feature of this filter object is that it produces low pass, high pass, band pass, and notch outputs simultaneously. All four are available as outlets. And those are those four outlets on the bottom, right? So we could try turning this on. Let's see if it actually will work. We might have to save it. I'm also kind of nervous about blasting anybody with noise, so let's see. Okay, it's actually outputting a signal. Oh yeah, there it goes. There it comes. Okay, so let's just turn down the volume level here. Notice we got a little handy signal indicator in the bottom right corner of this patch. So now that we have white noise, this is a white noise generator passing into our filter, and the low pass option turned on. This slider, you see, is connected through a little bit of math. That's demonstrating what frequency it's set to. Cool. And then resonance control somewhere between 0 and 1, I think is what it said. We could probably take it higher, but should we? That's a big question. Okay, let's turn off the DSP. Great thing about these help menus is that we can control click on the background, unlock them, and then we can highlight the parts we want. So we could just take these three devices, copy, close this thing up, and paste these into our patch. We'll get rid of that other SVF that we had. And look at that. Now we have that piece that was working before in the help document. We could just take the whole thing if we wanted to, but now we have a working filter and we can maybe route our signal into it. We're already using a mono signal, so let's just take that signal from the plugin, input channel 1, and we'll send it into the filter. Notice the filter now has some numbers in here. These are arguments, okay? And if we want to maybe see a little bit more about what arguments it can take, notice that there's a menu or a little window, a little info window over here to the right of the example filter, and it's telling us this will take arguments. The center frequency should be a float number with a decimal point, basically a number with a decimal point. Doesn't mean it has to have value beyond the decimal point, but you can see here the number written is 797 period, and then a space. And then we'll also take another float number, which will tell us the Q or the resonance, also known as the resonance. We could send symbols, write symbols in there for frequency, linear response, radians. We can read more about this in the reference document about the SVF. And I think, where can we access that? That's over here somewhere. Does that do it? Where's the this is the reference, basically. Let's see. Open full reference, that's what we want. This will tell us all about that particular device. There's the SVF. It'll tell us what all those menus mean, all those options, all those attributes that we can use mean. Okay, so we've got kind of preset in this filter some values. Let's get rid of those. I don't want those. I want to be able to control that myself. So we'll get rid of all that. Let's return it to its original state. It still has the low pass coming out into this device. We'll send this device out into our live gain device. Okay. And then that's automatically routed already to the plug out. Okay. Actually, we don't even need that. Just go right into the left channel. All right. Now, can we control this filter? That's the next step. Let's control that filter with something like, hey, like our live dial. and there's a live dial. Looks awful familiar if you're a user of Ableton. In fact, if you look right back here, it looks just like these dials for panning and monitor volume. So this is a live dial, and if we hover over its output, we don't need to send the dial any input per se, though we can send an input to set the knob value. But we want to read the knob value. We want the parameter value that we set on this knob to send a number into our SVF. And notice here, the signal or this input will take a float or a cutoff frequency, or rather a float and assign the cutoff frequency. This output will send an integer or a float value between 0 and 127 by default. So it's kind of set up for quick and dirty MIDI modulation or MIDI manipulation. But we can change that in the inspector, which we'll do in a moment. So we can connect this to our cutoff frequency input. And notice that now this cable looks different, right? This is not a cable that sends audio signal. This is just sending a number value. These cables are all carrying our signal all the way through our patch and out. But these cables just carry number information, not an audio signal, not a signal connection there. Okay. We might also want to set the resonance, right? So maybe we will option click on this live dial, and we can set this second one's output to the resonance. Now, the range that these controls expect is very important. These inputs expect is very important because the input signal is telling us this, or the cutoff frequency input is telling us it wants a value in hertz. That's kind of the range that it's going to control. Whatever number we send, it's going to refer to the frequency of the frequency cutoff. And our range of hearing is what? 20 to 20,000 hertz. So we might want to set this knob to something in that range, right? Rather than the 0 to 127 it's going to default to, right? The resonance input, maybe even bigger problem, because this will only take an input signal from 0 to 1, but this knob is going to send from 0 to 127, which if you've used a lot of resonance on a filter before, you might know where I'm going with this. That might present unpleasant results. So we need to tweak these knobs. Okay, one way to do that. Let's go into the inspector. We've got the live dial selected. We can change the display style. This is a useful option here. We can set it to panel control. It can just be a large knob. It can be a tiny little knob. But the panel one, it looks kind of cool. Hey, Dennis, thanks for joining us. Hello from the U.S. Hello to Greece from the U.S. Thanks for coming in. So, okay, here's now the panel mode, the panel display style for our live dial. Let's do the other one too. Let's make that one panel display too. That way they'll look nice and fancy for Ableton, right? It looks kind of like our macro knobs in a rack. So somehow I deleted the device bottom, the vertical limit here. So we'll see where these all end up in a moment. Okay, let's go back to our first one. This is our frequency cutoff knob. Let's scroll on down. We could change the color and all that business. We're on the all page of the inspector, by the way. We're going to scroll down. The functions we really need to look at are maybe the name of the dial. Let's name it cutoff, and then we'll name the short name right below it the same, cutoff. And then the range, right? This is not going to be 0 to 127. We're going to make this 20 period space 20,000 period. Okay. That's our range now. If you look down here, unit style, we could change that to frequency now. And it's just going to put a little HZ next to the number, right? Up there on the knob now, it's gone from just 20 to 20.0 hertz. It's up to you whether you want that in there, but that makes it a little bit easier to look at, right? And we can give it a initial value. Let's set it to, by default, go to 20,000 because this is a low pass filter. All right, and let's do the same thing for the resonance. Scroll on down. We're going to change its long name to resonance. Could change it to Q. That would work too. Resonance. If you watch Tom Hall do this, he'll write in the long name, he'll copy and then just paste it into the short name. We'll set the range to 0 to 1 periods after each of those. And then we'll set the initial to 0. Perfect. And we can just, let's not make it an integer, because if we make it an integer, that 0 to 1, that 0 to 1 value will just snap. We don't get any smooth motion in there, which with resonance, we're going to want that. So we'll set the unit style from integer to float. And float, you see, just gives it some decimal point. Right? Now we actually have some range of motion in there. So unit style, the range, the long and short names, these are going to be really important so that we can see where these controls are when we want to map, when we want to automate, when we want to create envelopes. These are going to be really important. Okay, so let's come back out of the inspector for a moment. Let's save this and close it. And what did we forget to do? We forgot to add those devices to those knobs, those dials to the inspector. So let's come back over here. Let's go out of presentation mode into patching mode. We'll select our dials. We'll add them to presentation. And we can go back to presentation mode, and maybe now we can just slide these on down. There's my device vertical limit too. We'll grab our gain device. We'll maybe shrink down the range of that gain device because it doesn't need to be quite that wide. That's fine. And we'll save it now. And look at that. That looks a lot better. So let's let our... actually, here, look, it didn't default either. It's defaulted to 20 hertz, not 20,000 hertz. So let's delete that. And we will... probably got a user library. Let's bring this back in. And look at that. Now it defaulted to 20,000 hertz, 20 kilohertz. Here comes the beat. Hi, kitty. Hey, we got a filter. We got a working filter. And even better, we can come into our our Ableton clip. We can view our clip envelopes. And down here, we can view our cutoff resonance and volume controls all inside of our device. And that means that we could come in here and maybe do some funky modulation of the filter. We're on the cutoff right now. Now, notice a lot of this is going over a kind of like a wide range of frequencies. So we might want to do some math to that 20 to 20,000 hertz range. We could also just kind of like grab this stuff, and Ableton allows us to kind of scale all of our automation. Maybe we shorten the loop. Then we can zoom zoom in a little bit, make this a little bit more exciting. Maybe if we turn up our resonance a little bit. You can see our cutoff knob jumping around over there. So this is pretty rudimentary still. Add a distortion to the filter. That's not a bad idea. What could we do for distortions? Let's come back in. Let's go back out of patching mode. Let's maybe, because we have the luxury of moving things around in this mode where we're not really necessarily tied to the interface. We can move things around and maybe try to make this a little bit easier to look at. These things will all move back to where they were in presentation mode once we switch back to presentation mode, right? And just put it all right back. But this maybe makes it a little easier to see. Might also help to zoom it back in here. There we go. So we have our plugin. It goes into the filter. It comes out into our volume control and out to the plug out. And here are our controls for the filter. But maybe we want a distortion. Let's come back over here to the MSP segment. Now, what could we use for distortion? We might look in here and we might see, let's go back out of filters. Let's go back to all. Here's one that might be fun, degrade. Now we might find other forms of filters, or rather distortions in here as well. We might have to figure out, creative ways to play with gain. There might be other ways to perform this, but so there's some different tools in here for manipulation like that. But degrade is maybe a quick and dirty one. Let's show that in here. Degrade. What does that do? Let's option click and see. Signal quality reducer in the form of sample rate and bit depth. So it's a downsampler and bit reducer, right? And we can play a signal, it looks like, into that first inlet. The second one wants effective sampling rate. And the third one wants bit depth. And then from the output, it looks like another signal. Super easy to use downsampling. And look here, we have another dedicated downsampling device. This one's going to round an input signal that probably will do some other types of strange distortion. Might just be, hello, my cat's silently trying to get my attention over here. Okay. And if we look here, it's telling us there's our signal input. There's our downsample value. And it's not really telling us a range, but we might find one in a minute. And resolution. And we saw that was like 24 bits down to 1. So we could send in any of these options if we right-click on this. Let's just make a couple more live dials, because we probably want to be able to dial in some of that stuff. And again, this might seem like, why am I doing this? Because we do have the redux effect in Ableton already. But, part of this is building the tools, putting the things in place, finding ways to make this unique and interesting and a little bit more personal. So, that's kind of the deal in here. Exactly. This is going to be a bit crusher. So let's take, we could try it in both places, right? We could try one in front of the filter. That probably will make sense. Okay, maybe we move all this other stuff down a little bit. Fit this in between. We'll move these controls down here. And we'll take these two live dials. Maybe I'll edit this one first in the inspector. I'll tell it I want this to look like a panel dial. I want this one to probably be, we'll name this one sample rate. Sample rate. And what's our sample rate range? Let's maybe go, you know, play a sample in a simple. Let's see. I'm going to try to figure out what you mean there in a minute. Let's finish this here. Let's go like 1125 to 44 100. Okay, and then that should be okay. Let's duplicate this. 2019. Tell me what you mean. Do you mean load a sample into simpler, or do you mean something through inside of Max? We have to use a buffer inside of Max. So let's come in and edit this one. This is going to be bit depth. You can write it like SpongeBob in the meme if you want. And this isn't going to be 11,000 to 44,000. This is going to be maybe, let's not go to 1 bit. Let's go to 2 to 24. Okay. And then let's set both of these actually to have an initial value. This one's going to be 24. This one's going to be 44 100. Okay. And we're going to route these to our inputs on degrade. Not every tool is going to be quite so simple as this. I unfortunately cannot read Russian. I'm sorry, 2019. But, okay. Well, now that you mentioned modules, anybody see that that new Daisy device that they're kickstarting this week? The Electrosmith Daisy. It's a programmable device, kind of like the Teensy. Oh, we have a few Russians in here. Welcome. Or you're from Greece, I think, right? Maybe not Russian. Maybe you just speak Russian. Maybe I'm just totally off right now and the chat's going crazy. Okay, we're going to select these. We're going to add them to the presentation. Let's view what our presentation looks like now. Oops, that wasn't the presentation button. There we go. We'll slide our slider over here. We'll put these up here. Now, it might be sensible to put our filter controls on the right side. You know, look at this. We could even say, we're getting into user interface design a little bit here now, but what if we took all this and we took like a comment down here and we created a comment that's just like that. I wish that hyphen was more in the middle, but we'll just do an arrow. Something like that. And we could, in our inspector, we could make this thing nice and bold italic. Again, if you're really tough, make it a little bit bigger. And we could put this up here in between these just to indicate that the signal goes from the degrade signal into the filter signal. I don't know, just thinking here, something. Let's save this. Okay, let's try it out. Let's delete and reload this. That way it'll come back in with its default settings. We can play our beat. Well, the bit depth certainly works. sample rate maybe needs a little tweaking. Okay, so this is another part of working with Max. Sometimes we have to debug things a little bit. So let's come back in, go out of patch mode. Oh, look, I made everything bold italic. Ugh. Oh, well, now we're going to live with it now. Okay, so degrade. We need to know a little bit more about degrade here. Let's go back into that help document. And let's see, what is this thing telling us? Ah, look, we were going a range of 11,000 samples to 44,000 samples, but it doesn't want that. It wants 0 to 1. See how this slider is being converted into a number here, and that number is between 0 and 1. So it's going to probably go between 44,000 and 1 or 0, or maybe, I don't know what the bottom sample rate would be. Very low though. So we need to come back into our sample rate knob and change its range. Instead of 44,000 to 11,000, let's go 0 to 1. And we'll make the initial value 1 so that it sounds like its original value. And we'll save. And we'll turn this off. And we'll let this go again. Ah, and you see I made another mistake, which if we'd kept on going, if I'd turned that knob, we might have suffered. We need that knob to be set not to integer, but to a float value, so that when we turn it, it goes between 1.0, 1 point nothing, and 0.0. So let's now save this again. Now we're hearing that grit. When we're dealing with sample destruction and bit reduction, probably don't want to go all the way to the lowest extremes because things get pretty noisy and crunchy there. But yeah, so we built a Max device, an audio interface, or not an audio interface. What am I talking about? An audio device, and hopefully along the way we learned a couple of the interface tools inside of Max. I think it would probably be fun to come back and do a MIDI device next time. Maybe we'll do. Yeah, we'll see what else we can do. Hey, before we go, maybe we'll try out this machine learning device that I built. The timing might be a little weird because I'm not dealing with my ideal latency settings here, but let's close this up and let's create an a MIDI track. We'll load in an instrument. Let's just do, where are my instruments? What am I trying to load? Stage piano? That would be nice. Okay. And so yeah, when we had Tom Hall on a couple of weeks ago, he was telling us about machine learning devices. And so I got really intrigued by that conversation. And I downloaded the ml.star package, which we looked at briefly when we were checking out the package manager in Max earlier. So I went and I downloaded that package and I started following some tutorials and built a device. And it uses Markov chains, which analyze incoming values. They you basically play some music into this thing. Could be a MIDI file, could be live performance. I built this one so that we can just kind of play in real time. And that's a little bit loud. So we can just play in real time, and it will analyze what we play and send it back out. Okay, and we might need to do a couple of tweaks. This is still in development, so it's not the most perfect device. But, and it'll probably sound a lot better if we put a little reverb on this thing, because everything clunky sounds better when it's got some thick reverb. Okay, so let's see if the latency really throws me off. And all of this should be listened to with the understanding that I am not a keyboard player. So let's reset the device. Let's play a couple of notes. Let's not go quite down that far. We'll build that model, and then it's going to play new material based on what I just played. It's the Arturia stage piano. It's great collection. It's their reverb too. If it sounds a little sample reduced or bit reduced, it's likely because of the audio interface settings on Ableton to do the streaming on PC. The audio goes a little wonky sometimes. So if you hear a little crispiness, it's not the piano or the plugins. It's the whole streaming business. Oops, let's not get that going. Okay, so you got the idea. I play something slow and lyrical, and the chords and the notes that I play, it analyzes, it starts performing on its own at a certain point. As soon as I click on the build model and start the clock button, I am not playing anymore. It's playing back on its own. So now we can train it on something else. Let's reset it again. Okay, and now I'm done playing. We're going to build the model. And now it's improvising. My hands are not on the instrument anymore. It's not based on the project clock. It's purely based on what I actually just played. So, and the note timing is purely based on my own note timing and a kind of approximation based on all of the notes that I played. It builds its own timing. So we could try that again with maybe something more lyrical. I don't know if Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is more lyrical, but something more identifiable. Okay, and if we open up this max patch, I'm not gonna sicken you with all the detail here, but the we can open this thing up and you can see kind of how it's working. There's pieces in here, kind of somewhat labeled as to what the segments do. There's timing controls. There's notes, note analysis, velocity analysis, chord tone analysis, chord quality analysis, note timing. A lot of pieces of information that are being analyzed. So it is demanding on the computer and on Macs, but uh, you can see we can get really deep with Macs in ways that without coding, it might be very difficult to do that in any other application. So as well, this modular based mindset of building things into one, uh, it's a little bit more exciting than coding, a little bit more fulfilling, mentally exciting. I don't know. There's just something more fun about that to me personally, anyway. So, but I think this is a topic that we could come back to, spend a lot more time with. So, if you'd like to see us do maybe a MIDI device next time, maybe visual stuff, we didn't even really get to touch on the the Beep or Visi collections, which these are kind of like pre-assembled modules built out of Max devices that can perform as an audio modular synthesizer, um, video modular synthesizer is found in the Visi collection. So we don't really even need to know very much about jitter or max, and we can use these devices, these collections of devices, to build modular instruments, visual and audio instruments. So I did a video a long time ago on Visi and controlling it via the modular synth. So you guys might want to check that out. Jubrel says, that sounds like a useful skill for those who make this software. I think that's what you mean. The yeah, I think the building in Max in and of itself is a marketable skill. There's you could of course build things that people want to use, build audio effects devices, Max for Live devices, and sell those things and make some money, just like you would with let's say a sample library. But maybe this is a little bit more engaging than a sample library could ever be. I think you could also find gigs doing this. You could prototype devices that you want to build in the hardware world in the software world and not have to worry so much about investing lots of money and time on a physical device that might not work. Rather, we can prototype those types of routings, signal flows inside of Macs. Very simple stuff sometimes. Um, so I think we'll cut it off there. This is already maybe way too much information for one video, as we tend to do. But if you guys have any questions, concerns, news that you'd like us to mention, I think the big one that I saw this week was that Electrosmith Daisy, which I think will be really cool. You can program that thing with Max. It's basically like a microcontroller, like an Arduino. They sell it with, if you buy the right package, with a Eurorack module that uh, um, you can program this little chip and then attach it to the Eurorack module, and the Eurorack module will completely change how it uses its controls and inputs and outputs. Not dissimilar to the Roland IRA modular effects. There have been a couple of other devices that were Arduino based. The Ardcore by Zazzy, I think this is Snazzy Effects, Snazzy Effects. I think that's it. That one did a similar type of thing. Detroit Underground DU made a device that's got an Arduino. It's basically a modular Arduino shield, but the Daisy is something that you can program inside of Max using the Gen collection of tools, which is a kind of a sub uh, library of tools that exist inside of Max. With PD, you can use Python or C++ programming to program it if you prefer code. Uh, but very exciting device coming from San Clemente. I think they're in the Qubit family. Something to go check out. I think their Kickstarter is already, you know, doubly or triply funded now. But go check out that Kickstarter. It's the Daisy from Electrosmith. They just announced it at NAM, and this week they kicked off the Kickstarter. So it's like $29, I think, for the microcontroller. If you want it with the module, it's going to cost more. But the programming on that chip, that alone could be a self-contained instrument. You could do everything on that, build it into your own enclosure. They also have a guitar pedal device. So, how about integrating Ableton with CV modules? Um, let's do that in another show. We can use something like the Expert Sleepers, um, what should we call it? The Expert Sleepers ES8, the ES9. Um, any DC coupled audio interface can send CV to your modular synth. And if you're working in Ableton, you might check out the CV Tools bundle or pack, which is a free collection of CV modulation and manipulation devices. Um, it's very easy to also build a CV tool like a DC offset. That's something that maybe we can discuss in that session. Like maybe in 2 weeks we could do that. Talk about CV in and out of Ableton and Max with an audio interface. I think that would be a good topic for discussion. But check out those CV tools for Ableton because they're pretty snazzy. They get into that world pretty quick. Thanks, KD. Thanks for coming in here and hanging out with us. If you own Ableton, you basically own access to Max. You might not own the full standalone version, but we weren't using that in any of these examples. We were just using Max as it's built into Max for Live, and the entirety of Max is built into that. So I would just encourage you guys to go and check it out. Spend a little bit of time in there. I've been working with Max for it seems like almost 20 years now, 18 years maybe, 19 years, and it's still kind of just blows my mind every time. So I would just recommend you guys get in there, spend some time with it, watch some more tutorials. Tom Hall did a great tutorial series for Cycling 74's YouTube, and it's all in a playlist called Programming in Max for Live. So if you guys want to check that out, that would be some more extended viewing for you, and maybe we'll pick up with this conversation in a couple of weeks. Next week we have LPGOB, who's a close friend of mine, a synth fanatic. She's been doing a lot of touring and performance, and then at the same time, she runs this workshop series that is aimed towards young female non-binary people to give them access and an education in some of these areas that we've been digging into and that we talk about in on this channel. So we're really excited to bring her in and talk about those initiatives, her touring and music making and synth experience, of which she's got a great deal. So, and there goes a motorcycle. That will indicate the end of the show, I think. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Go make sure you subscribe on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. Follow Sparks at SoundCloud at what is it? SoundCloud.com/0 SPXL. So yeah, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much for coming in and hanging out with us, and uh, let us know if you build anything in Max. Really excited to see what you guys do with this now. All right. Thanks so much, you guys. Take care.